Okay, is this on? I think we're going to get started. Welcome to Beyond the Promise, what works, what matters, and what's next in digital agriculture. We titled this Beyond the Promise with a lot of intentionality. There's a lot of promise in digital and AI-enabled extension, and our job today is to interrogate that with you. We have 4 perspectives for you today: an implementer who has deployed these tools at scale with Digital Green. We have 2 researchers who have been in the field with farmers using these tools, and my role asking what the evidence says and where the gaps are. So I'm going to set the stage briefly, and then I'll share the roadmap for today's session. It's 15 minutes, and we have plenty of time for your comments and your questions at the end. So just briefly, I think we all know there's been a really rapid rise in mobile technology in the last 20 years globally. This is from the World. Oh. Still figuring out the technology at the technology conference. There we go. Okay. So this is from the World Bank Development Indicators, specifically in low and middle income countries. And it's a little bit fuzzy here, but the black line is mobile subscriptions. And I think what's really interesting here is in 2018, there was more than 1 mobile subscription per person on average. And then the second thing that's interesting is just how quickly this happened compared to kind of that gray line, which is electricity, and the blue line, which is improved sanitation. And of course, this is just a graph of averages, and it doesn't show a lot about, who has access to mobile phones, who has agency over them, and so forth. GSMA does an excellent job with more refined data here. This rapid rise in mobile technology has led to an explosion of innovations across the value chain. There's a really terrific report from Dahlberg Advisors, which is a few years old, but it's called The Digitalization of African Agriculture. And they kind of put these services into 5 different categories. Today, we are solely focused on agricultural extension. We're asking, how can digital and AI-enabled tools enhance agricultural productivity and welfare? So here is our roadmap for today. First, you're going to hear from Alex Mora, who is Kenya Country Director at Digital Green, on how they are leveraging mobile to reach farmers at scale. Then you'll hear from Elliot Jones Garcia, who is at IFPRI, talking about some work and with a call that extension goes beyond simple information delivery to assist networks and build trust. And then finally, I will present with Zachary from CIMMYT on some work that details the role of experiments, learning, and impact evaluation in this space. So I will hand it over to Alex.
Thank you, Jenna, for the great introduction. How's everyone doing? Good? Awesome. All right. So I'll talk about what works, and it is in no way trying to paint like perfection. We are on a learning journey, and I'd like to share in the next few moments what we are learning from deploying PharmaChat across geographies around the world, including Kenya. So the conversation will flow that way. So I'll try to frame the problem first. Like, what problem are we trying to solve? And then talk a little bit about Digital Green and the journey that we've been on for those who might not know us. And then how we are providing agricultural advisory through PharmaChat and early insights from an external study by 60 Decibels. And then I'll hand it over to Elliot to share more deeper insights. So we do have a problem, and that problem is 500 million smallholder farmers around the world cannot get timely advisory services. And this is critical because if you have worked with smallholder farmers, timely advisory can mean a successful harvest or a failed harvest. And Digital Green has been trying to bridge the gap between extension workers and smallholder farmers for over 2 decades. So we began in 2006 using community video as a way of bringing farmers together and enabling them to adopt agronomic practices because the extension gap is wide. In Kenya, that gap hovers around 1:3,000 or 4,000. The recommended is 1:600. It's not going to change. It's going to keep getting wider and wider. So in 2015, we also deployed digital extension tools to support extension workers with their activities. And then COVID hit in 2020, and people couldn't meet together in a room. So we started thinking, okay, how do we make sure that smallholder farmers still get the advisory they need, no matter the externalities happening around them? And then in 2023, we deployed our first pilot of FarmerChat. I'm trying, by the way. All right, sorry. So we can talk about the 500 million smallholder farmers, but then let's zero in to one farmer in Kenya. Let's call her Nasinka, and she's a maize farmer in Kenya. Maize is an important value chain. Nasinka faces several challenges. One, fertilizer prices have surged by 10 to 20%. That cuts what she can be able to use on her farm. Pests and diseases will decimate 20 to 50% of her yield year after year. Market volatility, whether localized volatility or based by forces, external forces, will also affect her family income. And she doesn't know it yet, but climate change will affect her production between 5 and 20% by 2050. Those are all the forces facing a smallholder farmer. And then getting advisory to her from an extension worker is not cheap. It may cost about $35 to be able to get extension services to her farm. So we built tech at Digital Green to lower that cost of extension and deliver timely agricultural advisory to smallholder farmers. So how we are doing this now is through our AI-powered Android-based app called FarmerChat. FarmerChat provides accurate and local advice to smallholder farmers using voice, photo, and text, and text-to-speech and speech-to-text methods, and is available in local languages, in languages that farmers can understand. We do not have all languages because some are low-resourced, but we have about 16 languages on the app, and we call from mini LLMs. The app is very easy to get started on. Once a farmer downloads, we barely collect any information. They can get started on their first question and onto their user journey very quickly. If they want to get like the chat history, then they can insert their phone number and we'll be able to view their chat history. And then, because we want more women engaged in digital tools, we do collect gender information. We do collect on the app the types of crops and types of livestock that farmers have on their farm so that the advisory is tailored to what they need. So that's what it looks like. To your left are the input buttons, and then the gender details that I talked about to the bottom left. And then to your right, we do have a 3-day weather forecast that we try to align to the crop calendar in each of our geographies. And then starting to chart is through an image card, very visual based. And this is based on the lessons that we have learned while deploying FarmerChat. It's an AI built for farmers. So as the farmer is interacting with the tool, it's learning how they ask questions, learning what's in their farm, and able to provide advisory based on that. And then a farmer can be able to take a photo of their sick plant and be able to upload it and get a diagnosis and know what to do, or a pest that they have discovered on their farm. And the questions don't have to be complicated. They can be simple structured questions that are conversational in nature. Okay, so I just want to talk about like the why we do what we are doing. At the end of the day, it's really not about the tech. It's about the development outcomes that we want to see. But with PharmaChat, if you look at our journey as a continuum, we look at the model and ask, is PharmaChat giving the right answers to farmers? And then, is it easy to use for farmers from a product standpoint? So constantly refining the product to be able to provide timely advisory. And then, is behavior changing? Are farmers adopting new behaviors while using the app? And then looking at impact and overall development outcomes. Because at the end of the day, food security remains a real issue for the smallholder farmers. We've seen some success from studies that we have conducted with 60 decibels. It's an external study. So one of them is that farmers, 83% of farmers say they are more confident in the actions they take on their farms. And we've seen also a sharp rise, a 10 times rise in adoption of practice within the last month. Over 70% of farmers told us they had adopted a practice within the last month. And here are other results. Our Net Promoter Score was very high at 75, meaning people are sharing the app, and women were sharing the app more than men within their networks. There was meaningful use achieved at 61%. That indicates a strong understanding, trust, and consistent application of recommendations. 96% of farmers reported improvements in their farming practices just because of advisory given, and 68% said their farming had improved very much. In terms of the impact on farming practices, 78% of the farmers who are interviewed said they had a much better season, probably owing to the timely advisory that they are able to get. And they found information much easier at 79% and were able to take a concrete action or decision on their farm. So our journey is to continue learning. And the study I've just shown you is just a small step in trying to understand the impact of PharmaChat. But we do have randomized controlled trials, one that is ongoing, run by IFPRI, funded by the agency fund, that will complete in December 2026. And we are looking to measure the impact of PharmaChat on access to timely, tailored extension information, adoption of good agricultural practices, farm productivity, and household income. And then we have another one scheduled for Ethiopia. The baseline is currently underway, April and May 2026. The midline will be a year later, and the end line in October, November next year. And then we have a larger study in India and Kenya, also by IFPRI and funded by the Gates Foundation, where we'll do the baseline in Q2 of March 2027, and then the end line in 2028. And that will be a much larger study to test the effectiveness, the effect of access of AI advisory via PharmaChat, looking at knowledge and adoption of agricultural practices, yield and productivity increases, agricultural self-efficacy and income. We've seen also a lowered cost in delivering extension services. I mentioned that it would cost $35 to reach a farmer. With PharmaChat, we are hovering about $1 to be able to get advisory to farmers. Are we trying to replace the extension system? No, that's not what we're trying to do. I've spoken with extension workers, and the tool actually just helps them do their job better. So it's just trying to close the gap, but also do it at a cheaper, in a cheaper way, trying to solve a problem that's affecting smallholder farmers around the world. So we deployed PharmaChat in September of 2024. We are now at 1.6 million downloads across our geographies in Brazil, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Kenya, and India, and with a healthy monthly active use. And for Nasinka, we hope that using this advisory will also improve her fertilizer options in a way that improves her soil and ecology. We will continue to improve advisory through reinforcement learning from human feedback, keeping humans in the loop of the advisory services so that she can have options to combat pests and diseases. We'll soon link her to markets and market information, and also build her resilience to climate change through timely agricultural information. So ultimately, we want to get to 4 million farmers by March of next year and provide them with better advice, improve farming practices for smallholder farmers, and ultimately improve the lives of the most vulnerable. So I'll hand it over to Elliot to take us through the next stage. Yeah.
Morning all. Thanks for coming. Yes, thank you, Alex, for handing over. I wonder if I'm actually be able to do this. And please give me a second while I figure this out as well. Was anyone? Yeah, okay. So yes, as Alex mentioned, I'm going to drill down a bit into the use case or with the in a user framing, in a sense to understand really what matters for the end user and complicate space a little bit with some nuance. So the idea is often that in adoption studies is considered a black box, right? We don't really know. There's very little understanding. Oh, it's fine. There's very little understanding about like what farmers do in terms of contextual information, contextual understanding, and the literature. Well, basically, the thinking for this work started from the idea that in the ICT4D community, there tends to be every decade we reinvent the wheel in terms of a new incredible innovation that can do a lot of good, but without actually paying attention to the lessons learned provided by the extension research community. And so what I wanted to do is situate these kind of LLM models into that a little bit. So there are all these assumptions built into the design of Gen AI for advisory services, but actually contradict what we actually know about what happens in practice. So of course, no, it's not meant to get rid of extension officers, but the idea is that they scale beyond them, right? Is that the reach can be extended. But of course, we're seeing this idea that usually agricultural advice is socially mediated and built on trusted relationships that are built over a long time. With like a pillar in the community, which is that officer. There's this assumption that seems to be coming up over and over again at this conference, that as soon as people have access, they get the information, it leads to adoption, which is clearly not the case. Adoption is actually is not linear, it's up and down. People use things and stop using them throughout the process. The way these are designed is usually based on static question and answer pairs, right? So you have a question and answer, and that's how it works. But we know that's also not how extension advisory interactions work. They're negotiation, they're iterative. There's a back and forth and a drilling down. And that it also assumes that farmers cannot clearly articulate the problem they're trying to achieve, right? I think no one's going to ask a question if they don't already know about it, right? Like if they don't understand there's a problem or they have assumptions about it. And it also assumes that farming is problem driven, which tends to be, right? Farming is about long-term aspirations, about looking to the future, about improving your livelihood. It's not about fixing things on the day-to-day. And it tends to be extremely routine. So, having said that, nope. So last August, we went to Nandi County with Jackie from Digital Green. I don't know if she's in the audience, but there she is. Hey, Jackie. We did focus groups with 50 farmers, men and women, and they were purposefully sampled based on their interaction level. So from like single low users to power users with people who are using it on a day-to-day basis. And what I'm going to present today is like a thematic analysis of the qualitative information that we got. So, oh no, what's going to go wrong? Okay, it's there for now. So the first big finding was that these systems are hybrid, right? So when people are onboarded, at the moment, it's generally per person. So we haven't got to that point where you can go beyond the extension officer. So it's digital and analog, but it's also risk and reward. There's a kind of trade-off in both senses. So when we were talking to the farmers, it was clear that they had this kind of acute and high-stake situation, right? Like they're under huge pressure from climate. These diseases are wiping up their crops constantly. They're really in need. Like it's a very severe case. And that when these systems are entering, there's actually a massive distrust for the human advisory networks, right? People have been burned too many times. Or even in this sense, like this lady was saying that she was in women's groups and she can't get a clear answer and she keeps being misled. Everyone has their own opinions. And then here comes Farmer Chat, which offers this incredible amount of consistency and immediacy to it, right? It's interesting that you'll hear somebody say, it's amazing, I can keep asking questions all day and it'll keep answering them, which is kind of incredible, right? I mean, yeah. But then there's also this kind of risk that emerges in the sense that it says that it exhausts everything. So they assume that we all know that large language models have huge limitations in terms of hallucinations and actual information they have. And people tend to feel that they don't understand that necessarily. These are, if we're talking about digital literacy, and even worse, it feels like is a tendency towards now moving away from person-to-person extension services altogether. And I don't mean that in a formal sense, but also an informal sense. This one lady was saying that I don't go to the women's groups anymore. I just ask my phone. So you imagine the kind of problems that occur with the informal networks people have and rely on day to day to do trade or anything, or like to support each other in times of need, being kind of depreciated by the fact that you're only receiving individual content. So after the onboarding process, there becomes this stage of kind of gaining use, right? So if you're thinking about you've onboarded the person, how did they become a power user? Was the kind of question we were trying to deal with. And we tried to, I wanted to talk about trust, and there's a bit of nuance to how it works, right? So we're also sort of saying, like, can you make a system trustworthy? And usually people suggest that means like putting a brand name on it or something. But the reality is we all know that trust is earned. Like it's not something you can't technically build trust, right? And you hear a lot from the people on the ground. Like initially there's this massive skepticism around it. There's loads of apps out there, and that some of them are scams. They're kind of burned too many times. So this person's saying, I thought it was just another business that I was going to be exploited. And then there's this kind of process of like checking and validating the thing, right? So we found a lot of people they would all ask questions they knew the answer to, and then so he says here, I wanted to check if Farmer Chat was correct. I asked about a disease I already knew, and it gave me the same answer. And I found out actually this is the same thing with extension officers. Apparently farmers will do this with human advisors as well when they're new to the area. They'll probe them. And apparently the extension officers find it extremely frustrating in the sense that they never know when the farmer's actually not lying to them. So there's obviously this process of earning that trust, but there was often other people that would say they had no alternative and they were kind of forced into it. This was one of the most interesting interviewees was in a situation where the extension officer wasn't there, and he had to it was time sensitive. The guy had left, and he was like, oh no, I had this thing on my phone, I never looked at it before, and then suddenly I opened it and it solved my problem in a day, and he was absolutely elated. So it's fitting this massive need in terms of gaining people's trust, but the problem is after that earning, it can also be misplaced. And I've learned now this is called automation bias, where people with low literacy or understanding about these things afford too much power to a large language model. So for example, one thing that people kept complaining about was the fact that they can take a picture of their plant and it'll tell them the disease, but if they do it for a cow, it doesn't do the same thing. And we saw this all the time. And they're like, why doesn't it do it? And I don't think it's technically feasible, to be honest. But it's interesting to think that they kind of put so much like magic into it that I think it presents a kind of risky scenario, right? And again, here it says, an agronomist might say, I don't know, but PharmaChat gives an answer to everything. That's not really that great. And then finally, the final kind of big term finding was like, what does so we've gone through the like onboarding process, we've earned the trust, and now we're actually using it day to day. What can I actually do? What does it allow you to do? So the affordance of the tool. And we found this was quite divided based on basically the ability of the farmer to prompt. And so we were talking about tactical versus strategic in a sense. So you found that most people were doing this kind of problem-driven and reactive use. So it's great, right? I have an issue and it gives me an answer. Fantastic. Or it's operational. A lot of it's asking what the weather is tomorrow, or like, how do I space my maize apart? But it doesn't really, like, that doesn't seem to translate much into kind of strategic thinking about their on-farm behavior, particularly if we're thinking about things like climate resilience and things like that, right? That above anything else may require like a loss in production before an eventual reward in terms of ability to deal with climate change. And then there was also that thing that like, there was clearly a sense that their expectations from the technology had been inherited from their relationship with extension networks in the past. So they wouldn't ask, like we had this idea that they personalize, right? We'd asked a lot of people, if PharmaChat recommends something I can't afford, I don't feel confident asking for a cheaper option. They feel like they would be offending the person inside, essentially is what they would say. So there's a lot of expectation there, in a sense of what people can use. But then obviously there was this kind of shift among more capable users. And this guy was really cool. Like he's essentially saying, yes, at that time I was only asking curative questions. Through his trust, he's then got to a point where now I can ask about prevention. So you can tell he's actually thinking ahead and using it to plan out his work. And then I thought, this is the final point. I think this is like one of the most interesting things about GenAI for extension. And I think this is where we kind of need to put our attention in terms of it's more than information that we're delivering. This lady here was talking about how she had this space of land and she was like, okay, if I had 100 chickens, how much land do I have? How much resources do I need to do it? And then she thought, oh, wow, it gives me all this amazing information. But what if I had 100, 200 chickens, 300 chickens, 500 chickens? Which is incredible, right? So she's been able to think beyond her means and imagine a life for herself that has been unattainable. And no one would ever give her the information around that. And I think that's the real power, in a sense, right? So yeah, just to conclude that one, and I'll hand over to Jenna to give some kind of more so what and next steps. But it's just to remember the fact that extension enters systems that are hybrid. Farmers value immediacy, but system limits must be made visible, right? We need a bit more explainability in terms of this. And that the affordances are dependent on the existing capacities of that farmer to be able to use it. So my kind of takeaway is the challenge is not only scaling a tool to access to a tool, but scaling the human and institutional support that would make it useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, to get myself set up. Okay, it's really good to be in a room of agriculture people. I feel like I haven't done a great job at finding the ag people at this conference. That is my background. I'm supposed to present on what is next, but I don't presume to be what's next. I think that's in the room. It's with the farmers. It's in the startup ecosystem, the software engineers, et cetera. But what I hope to do is make the case right now for research that interrogates what works and why. And I'm going to talk about how experiments can play a small role in that. Oh, and my name is Jenna. I am at UC Berkeley at a center called the Center for Effective Global Action. Okay, so just to kind of zoom out to a broad view, I just wanted to start by acknowledging how complex agriculture is. This is Embu County, which we're going to return to later. I chose this county because it has so many agroecological zones. There's a lot of Mount Kenyas in there, so there's a lot of different altitudes. And for an extension worker, that is so complex. For a farmer, they know their ecology, but climate is changing fast. And depending on where you are in these zones, the soil, the water, the climate is going to be really different. And then layered on top of that complexity are people with their traditions and their customs. Then there's the economics, the market access, the infrastructure, the intermediaries that serve that area. And then finally, the institutions that shape different decisions that farmers have to make. So I'm going to map this complexity into kind of the economics viewpoint. This is a really simplified causal chain of something you might see in agriculture, which is just a logical pathway connecting an initial cause to an outcome. So as it relates to agricultural extension, the job of an extension worker is often to change a farmer's mind, change their behavior in some way. Maybe she needs to add lime to her acidic soil, or she needs to alter how her fertilizer is provided. That's the job that an extension agent is tasked with. So after the behavior change, in theory, comes the improved output. And that could be a lot of different things. It could be increased yield. It could be that she needs to spend less time on the farm and can spend her time elsewhere. And then finally, the ultimate outcome is improved welfare, which, income is something that can be measured. Farmer return on investment can also be measured. There's also been a lot of talk about agency at this conference, and that's a lot more difficult to measure. But I think we would all put it in this bucket. So experiments can be a really good way to kind of untangle this causal chain by holding the baseline constant and then randomly selecting a group to receive the treatment. You can understand the additionality of a specific intervention and how that shapes each of the links here. And I know there's a lot of discussion about RCTs, when they're appropriate, why they might not be appropriate. And I am definitely here for that conversation and would love to continue the discussion with you. I have strong opinions on the subject and totally agree that they're really only appropriate in a small amount of circumstances. But when they are appropriate, I think that they're a really important tool in our evaluation toolbox. And let's see. These are some of the reasons why they're important, because with that causal information, you can really assess what is working for whom, and when costing data is collected, at what cost. Also, really interestingly, they can surface unintended consequences. You can look at distributional effects. How are women impacted differently along that causal chain that I just showed? And kind of the next frontier of this, which I'm going to talk about, is using impact evaluation to understand layered or bundled intervention, pulling apart different pieces of the intervention and how they might amplify their impact to affect a farmer. So just a really broad overview of, this is super simplified, but what we know in the space, there's been a little over 10 years of experimental studies on digital agricultural extension, and there's pretty robust evidence to say that they're cost effective and scalable. What's really interesting now is the weather forecasting bit, because there's been a lot of improvement in satellite and also in AI-enabled weather forecasting, which can lead to greater accuracy and a greater lead time to provide farmers information about the climate, about the weather. And then I'm calling this last bucket Extension Plus, which is extension plus input, extension plus market access. And this is where there's not a lot of experimental evidence, and I think that's really needed. Okay, so just to be a little bit more direct about what I said on the previous slide about digital extension being cost-effective and scalable, what the literature is seeing is that the impacts are really modest in absolute terms. So for example, a meta-analysis of 6 experiments that were in East Africa and India showed only a 4% yield increase across the studies. And I know that can sound really underwhelming, but a couple things here is that this was evidence on kind of the early generation digital extension that was just kind of basic SMS. The studies that have looked at interactive voice response or video mediated extension are showing higher gains. And I think Farmer Chat is really showing the way and delivering really qualitative improvements in the user experiences that farmers have with these digital extension services. So let's call the 4% the baseline. And the RCTs that Digital Green is undertaking now are going to show us what that ceiling is. But that's just part of the story. And if extension is going to move the needle, it really needs to address the full complexity of what farmers are facing in a really small margins business. So risk, information gaps, access to timely credit, access to markets. A digital advisory tool might nail the agronomic advice, but if a farmer can't access the inputs because they don't have a credit product that is tailored well to them, then that kind of misses the mark on the behavior change that the extension seeks to provide. So there are not a lot of evaluations on solutions that layer services that target multiple of these constraints that farmers face. And that's what the initiative that I work on is trying to unpack. And we are very much underway. So we started in 2021, and I think towards the end of this year, we're going to start having results and putting some results out in the world. We fund different kinds of studies. We fund full randomized control trials and also more scoping studies that are a bit more descriptive in nature, looking at adoption of tools. So now I'm going to turn it over to Zachary Gatanga, who works at CIMMYT, and he's going to give you an idea of what a non-RCT study in this portfolio looks like and what the results are. And then we'll have Q&A.
Thank you very much, Gina. And yes, good morning, everyone. Yeah, so I'm going to present to you results of our pilot study that we conducted in EBO. And this just builds up on what has already been presented. So we are piloting an app called Plant Village. It's an AI-based, mobile-based advisory app that gives advisory services on agriculture. So what we wanted to find out is, first of all, to understand the level of knowledge or the level of exposure to mobile apps, mobile digital apps that are used for farming, but also try to understand whether there's really a gap. So when we visited, so we worked with groups, 20 groups, and most of them were mainly women. So when we visited, we talked to the groups and also the members of those groups. So what we found out is when it comes to that question, whether there is a gap that is needed, we found that very few people knew their area extension officer. Okay, about 3%, even less, even fewer had actual contact. If they wanted to contact the extension officer, very few could do that because most of them, they did not have that contact. And so you can see a real gap here that we are trying to fill. So now, with that background, we introduced the Plant Village app. We had a team from the Plant Village. So we introduced the app. We discussed with them how it works. And then we wanted to know whether there's interest in these types of mobile-based advisory apps. So we found, first of all, the level of knowledge was very low. None of the group members had knowledge about Plant Village, so zero knowledge. About other digital apps like DigiFarm, DigiCow, FarmerChat, we had a small percent that knew about them, but they were not using them. They had heard about them, but they were not using them. So now, once we introduce, we ask the farmers. So we asked the farmers, how interested would they be to participate and even use this kind of apps in their farming in an effort to try to bridge that gap. We find that overwhelmingly 87% of them, actually 88%, said they are very interested in using the app. 12%, they were somewhat interested. But you can see the level of interest. But we did not just take their word. So you'll find that was a baseline. Then we come back after some time and we'll find out whether people are actually using that. So yeah, I've already discussed that. For you to use the app, you need to have a mobile phone, and you can see at least 52% of the farmers owned one, and over 65% of them also used the mobile phones to access agricultural information services. The reason why that is a bit higher is because even with non-smartphone, the feature phones, you can actually get advisory services through SMS, okay? So that's why that number is high. Yeah, so now we conducted an headline survey after we introduced the app. Of course, we did, before this one, we organized with the extension staff so that they visited the group after we did the initial introduction. And also we had selected the lead farmers from each of these groups. So we trained them on the use of the app and how they can help their group members register for the app and also use the app. So now in the headline, we found that at least overwhelming 70%, 71% of them attended the training that were organized through the extension staff. 40.5% registered for the app, and 42% used the app for plant disease, pest and disease diagnosis. We'll discuss why the registration was quite low compared to the interest that was expressed by farmers themselves. One is the registration process was a bit complex for Plant Village app, but also there was limited access to smartphones. You saw at the baseline it was 52%. Now when we randomly select 200 from them, it was about 48% who had smartphones. But of course, those who did not have had some form of access to smartphone through other household members who have them. Yeah, I've talked about the complexity in registration. You require an email address and all those things. So it became too complex for the farmers to do that. And also the general low digital literacy. And exposure to these apps. And then, yeah, there was also a challenge in terms of usability and access. And this had to do, sometimes there was a delay when the farmer tries to do the diagnosis in their farms. Sometimes you have delay. And sometimes some of the recommendations did not match what was available in the area where these farmers were. So they felt that those recommendations were not very relevant. We shall be discussing about that. Oh, sorry. Okay. Thank you. Now, what did we learn? So what we learned is that they are strong predictors of not just the Plant Village app, but in general, this kind of apps that we are promoting. So we find that people who are already using smartphones for agriculture had high adoption rates in terms of registration and use. Also working in groups and having a lead farmer, lead helps. We also find that training is key. Okay, training is key. So people who attended the trainings, we saw 71% attended the training. So the registration and app use among that group was very high. So those are good pointers. In terms of recommendation, farmers, and this is from the farmers now, farmers' experience, they said that we should leverage on the TVs because we find that 92% of the households that we visited own a TV. And being Embu, there's usually weekly agricultural programs in their vernacular. And we found that 94% of those, they actually tuned into these agricultural programs every week. So they said that now these kind of apps can be promoted. So just have a highlight or about these apps, so that at least as they watch those programs, they also made aware that there are these other apps that they can use to help them get agricultural advisory services. And it's because these TV programs are not always tailored towards specific problems that a farmer have. So this again will be an additional support to them. In terms of training, they said that they need regular training. So you train them and maybe you do a refresher training so that they can understand properly how the app is used. They said that the app's registration process should be simplified. And in terms of contextual relevance, I have said some of the recommendations were not relevant to their context. For example, maybe you say they make a recommendation about a fertilizer. That fertilizer is not there in that area. So yeah, so they said, and then they also recommended that we should also include in the app the livestock aspect, because that was missing in the app. And so this is also something to learn even for others who are developing similar apps. What can we say? As a way forward, I think there is a need to partner with maybe private and public sector, so that at least we can address some of the constraints that farmers have, because some of them require policy interventions. For example, like data. Yeah, farmers are already using. We checked, and they're already using data for social media and other functions. So, but they said they need more support, and maybe that's where the policy comes in. Also, the mobile phone access. Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, we have a limited time for comments or questions, but I think we'll stick around after.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. My name is Mitra Arjun from Frugal IoT, and we work on low-cost sensors, especially in the agriculture and related sectors. Alex and I were both at a conference last week on agroecology, and I think we're the only two overlaps with this conference. And I'd love to see more of an overlap between the thinking of agroecology and the thinking I'm seeing here. In particular, like I would suggest the concerns there were a lot around data extractivism, around how that's used in these kind of applications to sell people more fertilizers and pesticides rather than sustainable solutions. And I would also think one of the biggest differences between that conference and here was that if there's limited resources, they'd like to see them spent on community engagement and co-design rather than on the M&E process, which I think very much takes data out of communities and pushes it up into the research environment rather than bringing ideas from that research environment and bringing it back down to the communities.
Shall we take two or three questions, please, rather than short questions?
Thank you. I had more of a observation, but like would really like to hear like a rebuttal or like your responses to it. In Alex, your presentation, I saw that you were talking about certain information, like quantitative information, like you mentioned that 7% of farmers are, retaining their traditional practices, 70% are changing, 1.4 million farmers are now being reached. I'm sorry, like for me, it's hard to contextualize what that means, like 7% of what? What is the user base that you actually tested against? And again, like on the 1.4 million farmer bit, I saw that on the map that you had flashed, India is one of the regions you're in. India has like 100 million plus farmers. 1.4 across 5 jurisdictions is not even a percent of. So my question is like, I think like when you are presenting these findings in the spirit of transparency, it is important that it is disclosed and contextualized in like what figures you are talking about it, because that otherwise it feels like, yes, 1.4 million sounds great if I'm thinking about it objectively as a number. But when I pitch it against the idea that one jurisdiction of the 5 where you are has close to like 150 million farmers, it feels like a very, as you flagged, that sounds like a very modest amount of impact for digital ag advisory. And perhaps we need to think more about how do you expand that and what is the larger footprint looking like?
One more.
Thank you. So my name is William Devon, and I work for Opportunity International, and we have a similar AI-driven app. First, I think that on the numbers point for a technology that is sort of relatively new, 1.4 million, depending on what you are deciding, it's not bad. I know it's not solving the whole world's problem, but in this sort of, those of us using AI, I think it's probably one of the largest. But my question is around the sustainable model. So how is this thing sustainable? Who is paying? Are the farmers paying for this? And also, do you see a sustained usage? Is it, if you say you have 1.4 million using it, I suppose those are those registered. And if you said you have a healthy active number, what does that mean? What would you define an active number is? And what is the source of your content? Do you see content to be an issue? Thank you.
Can I respond first and then go to you? So I want, not necessarily relation to yours, I agree that the community-based stuff is super important. And I think it's been neglected in a sense. And I think that we should really move beyond the idea that information delivery is an individualized process through phones, right? It should be something else, right? But I think to Amin's point and yours, and to kind of add to it, I think there's a huge problem with social desirability bias, right? So if you ask somebody, do they like AI? Are you interested in it? They're going to say yes. They're always going to say, oh, it's brilliant, it's wonderful. And I think this is both a methodological problem, but it's also kind of in practice. So like, when we were doing those field studies, you would go and ask the farmers, yeah, it's great, wonderful. It wasn't until they actually started to ask, we were like, okay, do you have any questions for us? That it would become clear they just didn't understand what they were talking about. Like they were like, yeah, I can't give an example, but that one with the taking a picture of the cow is one. But I think I also said quite a lot about how there's like an inheritance of how people expect extension to work from the human-to-human interaction. And we found, I think there's going to be a real issue with farmers lying to Farmer Chat, because farmers are accountable to an extension officer in a certain sense. Whereas I don't see any people moving forward with it unless there's something to say, okay, did you actually do that or whatever? And I think that basically comes to your position, is like, there's a difference between 1.4 million users who have downloaded the app and used it once, and people who actually have got some like real value out of it. And I think we should also move away from this kind of like metrics based on downloads or like opaque retention scores. But yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I think that's valid. I think that's valid. And the app, we deployed Farmer Chat in September of 2024. That's just 1 year and some months. So for me, giving that 1.6 million downloads is just showing the possibilities because we are seeing a healthy monthly active use of about 30 to 35%. We're seeing women engaged in the app. But that study we conducted, and for the results I mentioned, was just in Kenya. So it was conducted by 60 decibels between 452 farmers. And we, went through like, what is their experience with the app? You're right. India has 1 billion plus people. We just have 1 million, but that's the issue. Like, we need to close that gap. And this represents a pathway. But to Elliot's point, yes, we should move away like from just downloads, but what are people actually doing? And I think that's the purpose of the RCT and impact studies that we are now conducting, to show us like, how is this impacting livelihoods? How is it impacting income? Are they moving from just advisory to more complex ideas of how to manage their farms? So we're on that journey and we're just getting started. And to your question, someone has to pay. The app, there's a cost for activation and there's a cost for engagement and query. And with all the people who download the app, we make sure like we try to get them engaged throughout their user journey. Someone has to pay for that cost. Right now, philanthropy is paying for that cost, but we are testing out models with telcos, white labeling FarmerChat. We've done that in Zimbabwe, and they pay us for running the tech and managing the tech. But that testing out other sustainability models is also a function of scale. So that's why we are trying to also reach more people, but reach them in a meaningful way. Yeah.
I think we're getting shepherded off the stage. I have a quick comment and we'll stick around. I think what's really exciting about digital is, from the M&E perspective, like Digital Green, is the ability to use administrative data and start more of a participatory science approach. I think that has potential to change the M&E field into something that is more participatory and community driven. And there's, new models that are emerging to that approach. So I'll leave it at that and hope we can continue the discussion.